Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Black Advancement. I'm your host, Ajuman Jasante Goodman. On the screen with me, I have Shanice Goodman, I have Greg Goodman, I have Brandon Coney, COO, and I have Maurice Franklin. Before we get into the topic of the day, which is charter versus public school, I'll tell you what the Black Advancement is all about. Black Advancement Incorporated is a nonprofit organization that looks to combat problems in the Black community through action and dialogue. Today on our front street for our topic, we have a little soliloquy about what we're getting into here. So, there are many people who believe that education was best for Black students prior to integration. Although this is literally another topic within the Black Advancement's focus itself, it does beg the question of why so many people would feel that even under those oppressive circumstances, our children were better served. Why would they believe this? Simply is because they believe the teachers, the parents, and the community were all invested in the school system and the success of the students. Believe it or not, this argument is still remarkably similar. Well, this argument is remarkably similar, I should say, to the charter or public school debate, specifically concerning Black students. With the education achievement gap seeming to never close and proven systematic biases for Black students in public schools, many more people are looking for other options to educate their children. Despite all of those facts, there is a legitimate argument for having a public school option, primarily that it is free and provides a wide range of educational levels. With all these things considered, do you believe that charter or public schools are contributing to the destruction of the Black community? So before we get into it, let me go ahead and get with the first question, which is, do you believe school choice is necessary for Black people? Why or why not? And I'm gonna start with the OG, triple OG of the program, Greg Goodman.
Yeah. Do I think, what'd you say the question was?
Come on, man. Come on. Okay, no. The question is...
I was thinking about it while you were saying, but go ahead, say it one more again.
Do you believe school choice is necessary for Black people? Why or why not?
I always think that having different options in any scenario is good for Black people, based on the discussion that we had before with some of the problems that we've had in public school, based on the treatment and at times blatant racism that occurs in public schools because of the teachers, some of the teachers' values and where they stand as far as Black people go. Like a lot of these teachers in public schools, some of them come from places where they don't necessarily know any Black people except for the ones that they see on TV and the news. So they already have a preconceived notion of how Black children are, the way they're acting, the way they're going to behave. So it's good to have it's always good to have an option on where your child should be educated. Now, with that being said, because of finances and other things, I'm a huge fan of public school because not everyone can afford to send their kids off to be educated in a private school type scenario or a charter school type scenario. So because of the financial issues that are in a lot of Black communities, I'm a bigger fan of public school because that is the best option for most.
Okay. I'm gonna go Shanice. I'll go with Shanice next on this one. Coney, I'm gonna have you back clean up because of your position. So
okay.
Go ahead, Shanice.
I think school choice is always a good option. Being a traditional school teacher, I do see implicit bias sometimes within the curriculum, within the teaching staff. So it's really, once your kid gets into the school, it's really kind of like we're leaving it up to chance. And that's the same with life. You know, we don't know what we're going to get in life. And as far as the charter school, I know it's a lottery-based system, so not everyone is going to be able to get into a charter school, but their curriculum is a little bit more flexible. And if you don't, and their missions are clear as far as like how they want to educate. Because I know we have one here in Frederick. It's a classical charter school, so the curriculum is based on classical learning styles. So given that choice, it will be good for parents because they can kind of say, okay, I know exactly what my child is going to be they're going to be learning based off of the philosophy of that school. Whereas traditional school, we're all just giving the same. You're going to learn how to read. You're going to learn how to write. You're going to learn calculus. You're going to learn chemistry. You're going to learn, and it's based off of tradition, things that we have doing. So what you're getting is basically you're getting is basically what your child has is going to get. So so I think the choice is good because you kind of get the idea of um, I have a I can enhance what my child is receiving. Whereas in public traditional schools, you don't get that choice. You just get what you get.
Maurice.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I definitely always agree that giving parents a choice on where they send their kids is a good thing. Um, but I guess just being a skeptical Black American, I don't see how if in large numbers we start doing that as a community where there wouldn't be a new obstacle or hurdle to try to overcome afterwards. So whether they say, well, okay, well, these certain charter schools or anything other than this public school in this area is accredited, or that, I feel like there's always some kind of backhanded way that they try to discredit whatever it is that we get into, even if it's successful and it's working for us. So while I would like to see parents have that option, I feel like I guess the only way to keep it consistently fair and out in the open is to have everybody in like a public school together. Because when you have all the minorities and all the other folks in the classroom together in the community, kind of with each other, you can't say, okay, well, now this school doesn't work, because it's like, well, no, your kids are here too, so this school has to work. These things have to be acceptable.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how I feel about it.
And batting cleanup, as I said.
Hopefully I did not freeze.
You froze, but it's okay. COVID, you know what I mean? Like COVID. Go ahead, Coney. Go ahead, Coney.
So I agree with everything that everybody said thus far. My biggest thing as to why I think that it's important for people to have choices or options is, ultimately, in my opinion, that's what life is about. I tell people all the time, money doesn't bring you happiness, but money provides you choices. Money provides you options. And the more options that somebody has to choose from, the better they can make an informed decision. I do agree, and shout out to Shanice as well for the proper verbiage of it being traditional school versus public or charter school, because charter schools are public schools, but it's a traditional school as opposed to a charter school. I agree with the things that she said and also that Greg said, and Maurice touched on something that was really important as well, of the standpoint of, if everybody's child has to go to a particular school, then everybody has a vested interest in that school succeeding. But because that's not the case, that's one of the reasons to why I believe that it is important for families to have the options of choices. Because you could live in a particular neighborhood that you're going to your traditional school that doesn't necessarily provide the best education for your child. Whereas if you live 4 blocks over, or 4 miles over from where you currently are, then it can make a significant difference, and it shouldn't. But unfortunately, the way that our education system is set up right now, that's the way that it is. So having options or having school choice, I think as of now, until the American educational system can be revamped, or until Black people as a whole can revamp the education for their children, I think that having school choice is the best option.
So another question that I have, because I think one of the bigger questions is funny, because when this topic was broached, a lot of people didn't want to be on the panel, because they were not necessarily didn't want to be on the panel, but they were more like, well, I don't know much about charter schools anyway, right? So everything I'm going to say is out of pure ignorance, which I'm fine with. I mean, no follow-up questions. Anyway, so from my perspective, to me, a lot of times, I think a lot of people look at charter schools and they're under the impression they only see the successful ones on the news and stuff, right? To me, at least. And a lot of these schools seem to be geared towards minorities, and I have a funny feeling of it being playing into the idea of segregation. Is the way that I see it. From you guys' perspective on the panel, how do you feel about it? Do you feel like it kind of promotes segregation in a backhanded way, or do you think this is something else?
I don't know if it exactly promotes segregation, but I can see where someone would come to that conclusion. And much like you, I don't know enough about charter schools to really say if it's a blatant kind of segregation thing that's going on, or if it's just happens to be that way. So,
Go ahead, Shanice.
I'm gonna air back to the story, the serial broadcast and the ones taking place in New York. I think that's where you're getting the idea from.
That's not what I'm getting the idea from.
But I know what you're talking about, because there was this school in New York City that parents were, what's it called? White.
Nice white parents is what it's called. I can tell you where I got it from in a second.
Okay, all right. Well, it's basically these white parents. They were going through the public school system, like going to different types of schools, and then it was like a competition. Like, this school offers this, but this schools offer this, and then there was no other white kids in the school. So it's like the principals were trying to compete to get the white kids into school and saying, we offer this, we offer this program. And so they would do all this pitching to get these white kids to go to the school. So they say, we don't like any of this. Why don't we start our own charter school? So they don't have to go to the traditional public schools where they're not the majority. So they decided to start their own. So in cases like this, because I think a lot of inner cities where you do have charter schools as a second options to the public schools, because of the lack of funding, it leaves a lot of our children that look like us in situations, because it's a lotto system, and so you're not guaranteed to get into the school. You may apply, but you're not guaranteed. So a select few do, but not everybody does. So it does tend to leave those schools with less white people. I say if the white people have, white people have a choice not to be in those schools, they're not going to choose. Just kind of like the governor, not the governor, the lady, the head of Du Bois.
Yeah, Du Bois.
Yeah, the one that she's hit for school choice, because it means white people, you don't have to go to the traditional public school. You can go to whatever school you want to, and it's free, but it's going to be geared. You'll have more people that look like you there. So I get that idea and concept from. So in that case, yes, it could be lead to segregation in those particular areas in the country. But if you live in a suburban area, we don't have a lot of charter schools here. It's not a lot, because our school system is good. I'm not saying their other school systems are bad. They're just lack of funding, lack of parent support. So so I get your point from that aspect. Yes, I would say it can lead to segregation.
So I have a quick question, because I know taxes pay for all the public schools. Does the tax money go to the charter schools too to pay for these things?
So I can speak on this, and this is only for Pennsylvania, but generally across the board, this is how it is. So taxes do go to pay for traditional schools, and taxes also go to pay for charter schools. So there's a formula that every state derives as far as calculation for money per student. And so there's a federal dollar number and there's a state dollar number. And most states, and I'll speak about the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they come up with that number based off prior year's funding, based off the number of students that you have in your particular school district, based off of what they calculate as the per pupil spending But in Pennsylvania, for example, for every dollar that a district, so the districts are actually the ones who pay the charter schools respectively. So each school district pays the charter school, and the districts get paid by the state. But for every dollar that a district gets to educate a child, if that same child were to choose a charter school, that charter school would only get 80 cents on the dollar. And the district would actually get to keep the other 20 cents.
Okay, I see.
That kind of sounds like the district would want more charter schools if that was the case.
So it's funny that you say that, and I've gotten into this discussion with people a lot, where a lot of people will say that charter schools are taking away funding from traditional schools, and if you knew how the formula works, that's not the case. So in essence, if you aren't educating a child, then you don't get funding for that child. So I mean, that's just like going out to a restaurant and having something on your bill that you didn't order at the end of the evening. It just doesn't make any sense. And the argument is, people say, well, the more students, excuse me, that choose a charter school versus a traditional school, the less funding that school district has. And while that may be true, that on a dollar for dollar basis, if you have 100 kids at school versus 99, and each of those kids, you get $10,000 for them, yes, you're going to be $10,000 shorter if you have 99 kids opposed to 100. But also from that same vein, you're not having to educate that child. So in turn, there are no expenses that you're incurring to have to educate that child. So why would you get any of the money? And again, to your point, Aj, is that, in Pennsylvania at least, is that, for every dollar that a school district gets to educate a kid, if they go to a charter school, they get to keep 20 cents of that dollar, and only 80% of the funding goes to the charter school. The only thing the district is responsible for is transportation. And just know this much, I've done the math, and 20 cents on the dollar is more than enough money to make sure that kid can get to and from that charter school.
Okay. Maurice, do you have anything to add to the second portion of this question?
No.
Okay, that's fine. Hey, we're gonna go to the guy on the couch, the disembodied voice of the whole thing. Guy on the couch, what you got for the first question?
All right, question number one. Do you believe school choice is necessary for Black people? Why or why not? I'm actually going to read something that doesn't directly answer the question. I just thought it might offer some interesting perspective. There's a responder named Paul Brooks, and he says that he came up in the DC school system in the 60s, the public school system. He has a pretty lengthy write-up here, but I'm just going to kind of go towards the end, because I think it kind of lends some credence to the conversation you guys are just having. So towards the end, he says, when properly funded and staffed with the best teachers available, the public education system can be one of the best for educating our children. If you don't believe me, just look no further than the white schools in your neighborhood and school district. However, our schools, and I mean the Black schools, have fallen victim to the charter school mafia, which has served to divide us more as a community and hinder the educational growth of our children. This sort of pseudo, quote unquote, pay for education lottery manifested system is not sustainable and will lead to the ruin of our children educationally. We're falling victim to a system wherein only the well-financed and connected amongst us will prosper. That in and of itself is unacceptable. Back to you.
Man, that's a tough quote. And that's the thing about this, right? So it's like, this issue is so difficult because from the perspective of traditional versus charter schools, as they say, to fully understand like what the charter school, where the charter school thing and where that realm all comes in and how it weaves in and out with the traditional schools it gets kind of complex. Like what he said was a perfectly good example. And like I had said earlier, like there was a special on CNN years ago. Like this is back when Obama first got in office. This is like 2009 or something like that. They were talking about the guy, Jeffrey Canada, up in New York. I think he was in Harlem. And he had created this school, this K through 12 school that was, you know what I'm talking about, right, Shanice? Yeah, because they probably use it as an example of, oh, this is how you holistically educate a child. And, people, they were doing everything they could to get into that school. Like the lottery for that, it was like a 9,000 people wait or something crazy like that. And I feel like I feel like that all the schools could be that way if people really put their effort towards it, but for whatever reason they don't. I'm sure people have their own reasons, but the charter school perspective of it is just, I don't know, it just seems like another idea into something that is very, very similar. I mean, like, and I can't speak for every school. I'm sure Coney, like, for instance, I think Coney Schools does really well in terms of like test scores and stuff like that. But I think overall the scores are about the same with the schools. So it's like, so why are people, so why are people going to charter schools instead of these other schools if at the end of the day, on average, people's getting the same amount of education, so to speak?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is just the desire for the community around, or the community at large, I guess, to support all of the students in that community. And regardless, I think, of where that student is going to school, what kind of school, if it's traditional or non-traditional, I think that you're going to have an issue if the community isn't really trying to support specific students. And I think that's where the issue really comes. I don't think it really matters where the kid goes to school. It just matters whether the community values that child or not, and the future of that child.
Well, also, if the community has the value in terms of their tax-paying dollars to be able to provide for the school itself as well.
Yeah, but I think that there's always money to pay for the schools. It doesn't matter where. I really do believe
No,
that.
I'm interested to see where you go with this, because I don't disagree necessarily.
I just think it matters your zip code. Like, I think that's really what it comes down to, is the zip code and the demographics of your school. Because we've seen in the same county where you can have one school that is just a complete mess. It's in shambles. It's 150 years old. It's falling apart. And you have in the same county, just maybe a different zip code in the county, and it's a brand new school. It's been updated. The technology is there. The resources are there. All the way down to where they'll have like a turf field.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, how does that happen in the same county? But then when you look at the demographics of that school, you're like, oh, okay, I see. But it's not that the county doesn't have the money. It's just that they've decided that money is better spent for these kids, because those other kids, they don't really care about education anyway, or their parent, or it's not a big deal to them, or they're just going to play around in school, or it's not important to them. So they just don't value our future, our potential.
Yeah. This is a Frederick County joke. Go Hawks. Anyway.
Yeah, but you're 100% right on that. That zip code, depending on what zip code you're in, your school could look like it's in the Flintstones or the Jetsons. It's one or the other, and it's not that far apart. We're literally talking 5 to 10 miles.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I've always wondered why they don't why that money isn't distributed more equally, based on just the state. Because I mean, school is a socialist program, and everyone, it's a public thing. So I would assume that the way that you keep that thing running and running tight, so it's even footing, is you spread the money out evenly. So everyone would, I mean, that's what would make sense to me. But
well, let me, Shanice, can you talk to your experience in a big city market being a teacher as opposed to being a teacher here in Frederick County, from that perspective?
Sure. From that perspective, I worked in a city school for 4 years, and we didn't have as much resources as I do here. Like, we had to pay for our own printing paper. The kids there, they're rough around the edge, so we just had to develop really good relationships with them. In order to get them to learn, they had to know that you cared about them. The parental support was not there, but if you reached out enough, eventually you'll get to somebody. And like some of the things, like some of the programs that my school offers now, they didn't have there. So and a lot of the kids were on free and reduced price lunch. Whereas the school I'm in at now, not as many people are on free and reduced price lunch. Um, and as far as like, but the thing that I valued the most at the city school were the children, because like they seemed to care, even though everybody was saying they did not care. They seemed to care more than the kids that I guess that don't really need to care because my parent does this and the third. But yeah, and I know that's probably way off topic, but I just wanted to add that perspective too. They seem to care more, at least the kids that I've taught, and it was harder for them to get the basics, as far as like knowing that they had electricity at home, knowing that they had um, knowing that they had like knowing that how they could have fresh water and things like that. It was a struggle for them to make sure that they're okay financially at home, and so the school was kind of like a safe haven for them. That's where they got their food. That's where they got their education. That's where they got love and support. So I think more investment should be put into those schools, because the outside of the school is not comparable to where we live. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're not getting everything that they need from their homes because of systematic racism. So we need to make sure that the schools, at least in those areas, those schools are, because sometimes it's just a haven for children, and so we need to make sure the schools have everything that they need in order to support them as people, as a whole person, because that's their haven.
Coney, I'm going to give you the last word on the first question, and then we're going to plug the website and move on.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with everything that has been said previously, and Shanice touched on some really, really, really good points, and as did Maurice and Greg. And I guess it all depends, and again, it comes down to funding and how your schools are funded. And again, I can only speak for the Commonwealth because it's the only place where I've worked in education to this extent anyway. But funding is based here on property taxes. So to the point of your zip code, if you live in a neighborhood that has expensive homes, their property values are going to be higher, and their property taxes in turn are going to be higher. Whereas if you live in a neighborhood where your property value isn't nearly as high, then ultimately that is what helps dictate the funding for your particular school district. And Greg brought up about you would think because school in essence is a socialist concept that you would want to equitably spread that money around, but at the end of the day, those that have, they don't want that money spread out evenly. They don't want their kids going to the same schools as the have-nots. It's unfortunate, and it's what it all comes down to at the end of the day is politics. Because I know here specifically, a lot of that is based off of how district lines are drawn up. Where you live will dictate what school you go to. And then also in turn that will dictate, I can't necessarily say how good of an education that you will get, because I have friends up here who went to crappy, by testing standards anyway, crappy school districts, and they turned out great. And I have, other people up here who I know who went to great school districts, and, for all intents and purposes, their lives aren't deemed as good. But I think that the biggest thing that comes into play, and Maurice talked about this, is community involvement. Community involvement and parental involvement are, I think, more paramount than anything else, because you could be in a great school district, but if you're living in a home to where your family is not supportive of the schooling, or you live in a community that schooling is not as important, you can go to the greatest school district on the face of the planet and it's not going to matter. Whereas you could go to a school district that by definition is a quote unquote bad school district. And again, I'm just basing that off test scores. But if you have people in your corner who are supportive of you, then you can thrive there. So.
Aja, you're on mute.
Yeah, the sign just popped up. COVID. Hey, go ahead, Greg. Go ahead,
No,
you had your hand up.
I understand what Coney was saying about the school districts and they not wanting to mix the parents not wanting the suburb kids, their suburban kids, to mix with the inner city kids and go to the same school. I'm not even trying to dig that deep into it. I'm just saying, as far as the actual funding for the schools, like if they don't want to have a busing situation like in the 60s and all that stuff, whatever, that's your racist problem. But what I'm saying is just the school as far as it goes, materials, the building and everything else, all of that should be more evened out is what I'm saying. And I don't understand that, because if that's the case, then everyone has the generally the same level of equipment to work with, then in that case, they should all want that, because that means everyone is getting the same. That way you can see if you're,
You would think that for test scores alone, right? For test scores alone, you would want everyone to have the same materials or something, right?
Yeah, you would want them to have all the same materials. And if you're white and your complaints is these people don't try hard enough and yada, 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 and everything is equal on same footing ground with the building, material, books, and so on and so forth, then you might actually have a valid point. But since you're not willing to put that to test, then I don't want to hear your crap. You know what I'm saying?
We'll end the segment on that. Oh, Shanice, go ahead, Shanice.
Like, one of my experiences working in the city school, like we went for days when we didn't have heat, or we didn't have in the building, or we didn't have the AC. Right. So if you think about that, if your kid is in the building in a suburban school and you don't have any heat, or you don't have AC, those parents are calling but we went for days. We had to wait until the temperature got hot enough where they could say they can go home. Otherwise, we were in a hot classroom.
I was about to say, I remember there being shutdown days where if it got 90 degrees
we can't go in. Yeah, we can't go in because it's too hot because we don't have AC, or it's it's too cold, so we can't have the kids. They have to make sure they wear their jackets and caps inside the building. But if you change your city, you change where you're at, then that would be unheard of, So
yeah, like it just seems like it's the child version of redlining.
Yeah,
like they've redlined the parents and forced them into a specific neighborhood, and then they redline the children and force them into a subpar educational environment.
Yeah, the whole thing is basically redlining. That's the root of everything with the school district. It all starts with that.
That's true.
So, but once again, like I said, even within that case, I don't see why the funding for schools would be more allocated to one school than the other. Your tax money goes where your tax money goes. I don't think you should be able to be like, well, I'm only going to pay my taxes if it's going to support this school area, district, and everything else. The money should go where it goes, and the money for taxes is for the American people. And as far as I know, the projects is still in America, and the money should go there too.
Well, I think that's the point of the whole thing is I don't think they necessarily see us as Americans. I think they just see us as here.
It's similar to voting. It's similar to voting, right? Like they make it very difficult for certain people to vote. And even though everyone constitutionally has the right to vote and everyone has the ability to vote, they make it much harder on one population than they do the other. And usually that's people who are who are Black or brown and or economically insolvent in some ways. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna throw an audible in here. I'm just gonna go to the second question, and I can come back and do the website plug after the second question for the one that I was doing here. Greg,
Okay.
you look like you're itching to talk again. Go ahead.
On the whole thing, if this country is really trying to be the best that it can be, then it needs to have all people involved. This country will never strive to its maximum potential if they're using a holdback program for a certain segment of the population. And I don't understand, after all this time, why we haven't figured this out yet.
That's what blows my mind too. Like I can't understand it.
If
It's
you
like
really want the best, then that's what it takes. Get everyone involved. You know what I'm saying?
yeah. It's like you got the greatest start. You got the dream team of potential, and you're like, nah, I'm only gonna play 2 of these players, and then have everybody else us on this phone call or Zoom meeting. It's like, nah, you got the dream team. Put them in the game. Like, put everyone in the game that could play, and they'll ball out.
That's called the 1950s Celtics, Maurice.
It's like if they had the dream team in '92, and they're just like, all right, Christian, you're starting. Like, get out of here. Why is Christian let this start? That's basically what's happening here.
Yeah. And it just doesn't make sense. But I don't think they want it to be the greatest ever. I think they just want it to be the best for them.
And I think so you have to understand, like, when you guys are talking about U.S. citizens and all that, and I'm just going to dive into my little fake panelist for a second, but when you're talking about people being citizens and all that, we weren't considered full citizens in the United States until 1965, 1964, honestly. Like, if you
I know.
Real, I'm just saying that from the perspective of the way that they were situating the country. They never thought of us as citizens.
No.
Like, never.
Like I said, people find that amazing that we're like generally the first generation of Blacks to pretty much have all the rights. We're like the first generation.
And they took some of those because they didn't reenact that damn Voting Act. I digress.
Fair enough.
I digress. I'm gonna go to the second question, and I'll do the plugs again, like I said before, going back around, because this actually plugs right into this anyway. And anybody can dive in, or you can start where we were before. Honestly, the second question is: has the public school system failed the Black community? Why or why not?
Yes.
Wow.
I think it has failed the Black community, not all of the Black community, but I do think it has failed by just creating an unequal environment for learning. Just like Shanice was talking about, to subject not even just the kids, but the teachers and the staff. Like, how long do you think you're going to retain top level talent at a facility that doesn't offer heating and cooling in the appropriate time of year, or doesn't offer the appropriate resources? Like, yeah, you can have the greatest intentions and the biggest heart, but if you aren't provided the resources, why stay? You know, it's tough. It's tough to try to either motivate someone to come or motivate someone to stay there. And then you of course look at the students, and you have them in that same environment. What are you expecting them to learn? Like, who's outside of somebody who works in like an industrial plant, who has to be in a extremely hot environment, who can succeed consistently in an uncomfortable work environment? Like, it doesn't work. Like, and we see this just in what's happening in the world today, where when the police get around Black people, they're uncomfortable. And so because they're uncomfortable, they can't succeed in their job because they're just not comfortable. And so when you take that back to the kids, what do you think the kids are going to do when they're uncomfortable, when they're in school sweating? They're not worried about adding or spelling. They're worried about getting cooled off, getting water or something like that, or being comfortable again.
And that was that's one of the. Oh, go ahead. No, I'm sorry. I didn't.
I'm finished.
And I was going to talk for someone else too, so I cut you off, and I'm talking for another panelist, and Shanice. But one of the things that Shanice had told me a long time ago was, like, you know, not the idea that that school is secondary for these kids, but the idea that just them getting to school is already a win. You know what I mean? Like just them arriving there, eating lunch. Like there was a student, and she can go into more detail of this. There was a student, I think something bad happened prior to them going to school, and they still came to school anyway. And they were acting out in school, but it was like the kid had the fortitude to even get to school in the first place. I'll be quiet. I'll go into the Coney. Did you hear the second question? I'm sorry.
I did not. I
Okay.
heard a lot of responses, but I didn't hear the question.
Perfect. So, and I'll let another panelist go so you can think about it, but I'll just say it to you so that you have an idea of what we're doing. The second question was, has the public school system failed the Black community? Why or why not? With that said, I'll let you think about it, and I'll go to Shanice next.
Yes, I do think the public education system has failed the Black community. Like many panelists mentioned, it's not equitable. So that's one of the main reasons why I think it has failed the Black community. Another reason is that it not only is it unethical, then you also look at the implicit biases set against the black men in particular and Black girls, and because our teaching staff aren't trained, just like the police force, that we all need to be trained to be able to see race but not judge. And because we as a people aren't able to see race and not judge race and to accept race as it is, we're failing our communities, Black and brown communities, because we're too busy judging and thinking that these students do not care. Therefore, we don't have to teach them like we teach everyone else because they don't care, their mama don't care, their daddy don't care, nobody cares. Therefore, we don't have to give them the best that we would give to other students. So they get subpar where other students are getting fabulous. So yes, so and for instance, yes, I do 100% agree we have failed our students, and I'm just hoping that more teachers are trained and more teachers and the system becomes more equitable financially, so that we can do a better job for our students, Black and brown students.
Right, Greg.
Yeah, they've failed on every level for Black students. Like I said before, when I was speaking about the whole funding process, I mean, that's just the beginning of it. The funding, they failed because they have not put everyone on equal footing by design. And I think if you put everybody on equal footing by design, then in that case, it's on the students and not more so the system. But they've already designed the system so that certain students are already a step behind other students. There's that, and I'm not 100% sure if this is correct. This is basically what I've seen, though, and maybe Shanice and Coney can correct me if I'm wrong. From what I can tell as well, with a lot of these schools, they usually take the more experienced, better teachers and they put them in those better schools instead of having them in the schools where they're most likely needed, who know how to control a classroom. They'll take a rookie fresh out of college and throw them in there in a bad situation. So by the time that they even get a chance to try and get their footing, they've already given up hope and they're jaded with the system and they end up quitting. So, like I said, the whole program, from what I've seen, has been designed to give a certain, give one class level the best of everything and another class system the worst of everything. Or at least the barest of minimums, at least, you know what I'm saying? And that's probably giving them more respect than they deserve when it comes to that, but they give them the barest of minimums to succeed. So, and until those things are fixed and adjusted and evened out, then there's really not much you can do. As a student, it takes, I'll say this, it takes a it takes a different kind of strong will and heart to make it out of the situations of inner city public schools and become a success than it does to come out of the suburbs and do the same thing, because there's so much more to deal with. There's so much more complicated things that are going on. We're talking about kids that wake up. Some of them are forced to take public transportation.
Yeah.
So they got to swim through angry adults and homeless people just on their way to school.
Like commute. They got to commute.
Yeah, they got to commute to school. And by the time that they do make it there to school, they have to deal with out-of-date books, poor facilities, heating and air conditioning problems. And on top of that, they have to deal with a rookie, jaded teacher that doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't know how to deal with kids that have been up since 6:30 in the morning just to get on public transportation to make it to school. You see, it all goes back to the funding. And if you fail the funding, then you're going to fail the whole thing.
I have a contrary view, but I'm going to let Coney go next.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody hit the nail on the head with this one. The school system, they have failed our Black kids, they have failed our brown kids, and I mean, it's not even up for discussion. The numbers in and of themselves will show that and prove that. And everybody's brought up great points to support that. You know, whether that's like Greg talked about of what a kid has to go through, you know, just to get to school. You know, I heard mentioned earlier of Shanice having a student, you know, who had to experience some trauma and then got to school and was acting out. And generally speaking, I guarantee they were all but acting out because of the trauma that they had to go through the day beforehand. But, you know, that's not taken into account with some teachers. But I think the biggest issue at the end of the day is the systemic racism that still plagues this country, that has helped shape and model how schools are. You know, we talk about the school to prison pipeline often at my school and just in education here in general, and the way that schools are set up, they are in essence designed for that. And the other thing, the American educational system hasn't been revamped since World War II. It is still set up to generally, so you have certain percentages of the population in which they are expecting to do certain things. And I can't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but, you know, we'll just say they expect 10% of all high school students to be your doctors, lawyers, your businessmen. They expect another 50% to make up your blue collar workforce. They expect another, we'll call it 35 to 40% to make up some of the lower paying jobs on the blue collar scale. And then they expect 10%, another 5% to be unemployed, another 5% to go to jail. Like there literally is a matrix that exists for the thought process for how the American educational system was created. And they did this, a lot of the biggest reason why is because, you know, getting back during World War II, you had a lot of factory workers who were working in factory jobs either to support the war and or support the economy, but that's how it was set up. And it hasn't changed since then. And even still, when it was initiated or created in the first place, Black and brown people we weren't even at the table to have the conversation.
We weren't even thought on it, right?
Yeah, we weren't even brought up at the table, let alone actually being at the table. We were honestly just the afterthought. And I think Maurice said it beforehand, is that, you know, they don't look at us as people. They just look at us as somebody who is here.
Very accurate. I'm gonna go to the website to the guy on the couch to get his perspective, and then when after he gives his perspective and you guys give your perspective, I'm gonna chime in a little bit. Go ahead, guy on the couch. What you got?
All right, question number 2. Have public schools failed the Black community? Why or why not? Brian M. says, I have to answer this by saying yes and no, because in certain school districts nationwide, we know there's discrimination against Black people specifically, especially in classrooms. In my opinion, I think it happens more to Black students that aren't making the schools rich by using them for sports. I digress. That's a conversation for another time. However, in the areas where there's a majority of Black people in positions of power to make decisions, whether that be the school board or local government, we have to take self-accountability as to why we allowed for us to fail so miserably in the classroom. We have to ask why we've not focused more as a majority to allow our kids to excel in math, reading above grade level, and communication skills. Back to you.
Those are some interesting points from, I think Brian M. was who the commentator was. Does anyone have anything to say to that? Go ahead, Shanice.
It is a two. He's right. It is a two-part system. Parenting is just as important as education. We can't expect the education system to raise our children, and so I do get that point. We definitely need to invest more in our children, rather it be, even if parenting is not available, then grandparents, whoever is raising the child, they need to invest in their education. We need to be advocates for our education. We need to speak up when we don't like the way things are going. Kind of like we discussed when we did talk about Black teachers, how communities need to be advocates. If they don't like something, they need to speak up. If they want more math and sciences taught in their curriculum, they need to speak up. We need to be a part as a whole, being a voice in the education system, parents, community members, whoever. If we want change, we need to suggest it, and suggest it loud.
So, seeing as how everyone's still kind of thinking and pondering. So when I thought about this question, I thought it was a much harder question than it is on the surface. And my reasoning behind it is, like, it's failed the Black community, but I don't think it's public school necessarily who's failed the Black community. It's the governmental aspects of it, the systematic governmental aspects of it. Because when I think of schools in general, or public schools even, the people who are involved in that stuff and all those people, they're not really failing the kids. Like, I'm not saying that to say that there aren't bad teachers and that there aren't great teachers and that there isn't good administration and there's not bad administration, so on and so forth. I'm saying that from the perspective of, they show up and they try to do their best every day, right? Everyone tries to do their best every day. But when the system is already set up to where, as you said, Greg, they're doling out money here, but not here. They're giving stuff here, but not there. They're setting people up to fail. You know what I mean? And we catch the flu, right? When they catch a cold, right? As far as Black people go. So we were already behind the 8 ball, but they're failing America, in my opinion, when they have these systems made up the way that they do. And I don't blame the public schools for that. I don't blame the public school system for that. I blame the people who they have to depend on in order for them to get the funding, in order for them to get the rules done, to get like a perfect example of this is the virtual learning thing, right? In some places, they tried to open up the school with all the teachers probably sitting there knowing that they shouldn't be opening up any schools. And then there's other places where they knew they weren't going to open up, at least they had an idea that they wouldn't open up the schools, and nobody bothered to prepare for virtual learning. So they had to teach people on the fly all of a sudden. It's like, you're setting these people up. And I don't understand how they can do that. And they're not only setting up the teachers for failure, but they're setting up the future for failure within the country. So it's just, I digress. I'm stop being a fake panelist now. Does anyone else have anything to say about this?
Yeah, I think it's a whole, I think the school system, I guess the public school system as a whole, I don't think it's just failed the Black community. I think, to be fair, it's failed America.
Yeah.
The fact that we're 10th, 20th, or whatever it is in education in the world, I think is a failure on our part. Like, we can't have the access and the resources that we have as a country. We can't spend more on the military. And then all of a sudden, when it comes to education, say, we don't have it. It's like, if there's a bottomless pit of money or finances when it comes to the military, it should be viewed, in my opinion, the same way when it comes to education.
But I'm scared, Maurice.
Yeah, because I think that, I think it's all tied in together. I can understand national security and the importance of that, but I believe that education is the initial, I guess, that first wave of security when it comes to America. Like, if you have your people extremely smart, knowledgeable, creative, and who are able to think outside of the box and willing to take chances. That's how you get all these high tech, equipments and things that help support this country, help keep us where we are or have been, or I guess perceive ourselves to be in cases. So I think the public education system has failed as a whole. I do think locally, when you start getting into those counties, those teachers, there are teachers who do know, who have maybe been in both situations, who have been in a bad situation and then have transitioned to a better situation. I think some of the responsibility also falls on them to be an advocate back for those teachers at those schools in which they had come from, and to maybe try to push the school board or whoever it would be to better distribute the funds and the resources and say, hey, I don't know if you guys knew this or not, but we're doing coding here at this elementary school. The school that I came from, they don't even have computers. Why is that? We need to get support for those teachers, so that they can prepare their students as well as at any other school.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll make mine real quick.
Okay.
To go to what you said about you made a strong point with everyone who's involved directly with the students in the public school system. They more than likely they do try their best and they do go all out, and it's more of a government out of their pay grade, so to speak, decisions being made that have pretty much decided the fate of not only the students, like you guys have said, the future of the country. But I think this country is in line for a rude awakening when it comes to this and the failing of the young people that are going to school. Because right now, this country has the allure and the swag where we can import great talent to come here and do those jobs. And what they're doing with the public school system right now is doing no more than making a bunch of worker bees. They're not making people to be job creators, to innovate, to take the next step forward, to think outside of the box. They've made school, they've turned it into basically a system of getting employees instead of creating employers. And when they're looking for the top-notch piece to anything, there's only two ways to get it in this country now that it appears. You got to inherit it or be born into it, or they're importing it in. But once we lose that allure of importing it in, and like every other great kingdom, I don't care what kingdom it is, I'm talking about corporate kingdom, eventually it's going to go down to a line where you're going to pass it off to whoever's son, and he's going to destroy the whole thing, and there's going to be nobody there to pick up those pieces if we don't have the correct education in line for someone to pick that up. So once we lose that allure in this country, we're pretty much dead if we don't continue to educate people and teach people how to think instead of learning how to take a test. But that's all I have to say. It don't really answer the question, but just an opinion.
We are all dumber now after that opinion. It's a joke. It's a joke. It's an inside joke. For God's sake. Guys are...
That's because I went to public school.
No, I'm not gonna let that ride, yo. I'm not gonna let that ride. And freaking Coney CEO down there is laughing real hard on mute. That's not good. It's not good for us.
Yeah, it was funny. It was funny, B.
It's not good. It's not good for us. It's not good for anyone.
I mean, I appreciate the Happy Gilmore reference. I really do.
There you go. So I'm gonna go ahead and do these plugs real quick, and then I'll get into the third question. So I'll do it as rapid fire. So from plug number one, basically research. If you guys are, first of all, go to www.blackadvancement.com. You can go to the website, or you can go to any of our other social media sites, which are the Black Advancement, so on and so forth. I'll say it at the end of the program. But if you don't know much about a topic, which this is one of those topics where hardly anybody knows a lot about, which is interesting because everybody's kid goes to school, right? You could do it on our research tab where we have, different news articles and things like that that are put there from different perspectives. So you can look at one and see which one makes sense to you. We have a topic section where you can actually put forth topics. Maurice actually put forth the topic that we're probably going to do for a symposium here pretty soon about Blacks in politics. Even though we already had a Black politics section, he brought something new to that, and we're going to probably go run with it later on in this year. Shout out to Maurice for that. Also, we have something called events where COVID, I'll just do that quickly. So there you go. Events, what events? COVID. There's another section also that we have called In History, where basically we deep dive into some of the things that, if you ever got into a conversation with a white person or a person of another race and they say, why can't Black people do this, or why can't Black people do that, or why are Black people in this situation? Or they'll throw out the famous words, Chicago, right? And then you can shoot back with redlining and all that stuff. Well, this part in our website is supposed to help you kind of with your elevator pitch of why things are so messed up sometimes for Black people in this country, and it gives them the history and an insight. The one that is on there in our In History section so far is about the lost cause, which is basically about how the South won the Civil War mentally, and how they basically used that and got over in America, and they used that and they propagated it to the children. And now you have things where people are saying you should have statues of Confederate generals up. I digress. Anyway, to the second part of my plug section, which is www.blackinvestment.com, we have debates, which is the thing that you're seeing here right now. We also have recommended websites. The one that we're recommending today is Clarity Window Cleaning. It's located down in Atlanta. Got broads in Atlanta, and they're down in Atlanta, and it's a nice business. It's still going in spite of COVID. They can't kill us all, right? And our book of the month is I Got Schooled by M. Night Shyamalan. I know it's the one that you're thinking of, yeah, because there's only one of them. It's called I Got Schooled: The Unlikely Story of How a Moonlighting Movie Maker Learned the 5 Keys to Closing America's Education Gap. And with all that being said, I'm going to go to the third question and then shut up. If money were equally distributed to every school, no matter where the students lived, would that help or hurt the educational system? I know that we've gone through this in different ways throughout the different questions, but whoever wants to dive into it, go first.
I don't know if it would help the education systems all around, but I know it would definitely help us as Black people. It would definitely help us. Because I feel like in most cases, once there's an even playing field, we usually thrive in those situations. There's usually more of us that reach higher heights when everything is on an equal lining, usually. So if you allocate the funds right and give everybody a fair chance to start at square one, it'll, at the very least, it'll even out. And that's at the very least, because it's just like, to me, everything else. That's why I'm a huge fan of sports, because it's you show up, everything's even, and you play. And once you're on that court and there's no special rules, there's no, I got a handout from my uncle or my dad knows such and such. It's just you and whoever else on that court. And when we're in those situations, we usually come out on top. So I feel like I don't think it should be any different in education or anything else. I just feel like that's just naturally what we do. We thrive in those conditions.
2 things. Number one, everyone knows that I would have been an all-time athlete if it wasn't for politics. Yeah, everyone knows that. Number 2, Chris Mullin made that dream team. So watch your mouth. Who's next as far as for this question?
I'll chime in real quick because I like what Greg had to say. I will say this. I think that it will significantly help Black people, but then I also think that it'll hurt them. The reason why I think that it'll help, as Greg pointed out, is that you level the playing field and give us the same tools and resources that everybody else has and the same opportunities, then I believe that we'll thrive. The way that I think that it'll hurt us, though, is that if they find out that we are now thriving from an educational standpoint. I think that the way the system is set up, they will find another way to harm us systemically. I can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what that would be, but at the end of the day, from my perspective, how things have been in this country is that they give Black people just enough to let them know what their potential is, but not enough for them to actually reach their potential. And I think that if you tip the scales on education to where they can actually reach their potential, they're going to tip the scales in another direction on some other front, whether that's the job market front, whether that's the political landscape. So while I do think that if the resources were distributed equally, it would help Black people. It would hurt white people. It would hurt the system in and of itself. But at the end of the day, it would help Black people. But I also think that if we take a step forward in education, we'll end up taking 2 steps back somewhere else, not because of our own doing, but because it's the way the system's set up.
Interesting point, Conan. I guess Maurice, we'll let Shanice back clean up on this one.
I agree. I think if all funding was equal, unfortunately, I don't see a change in anything. I think the rules would just change. The game would change. And our disproportionate, I guess, I don't know what I was trying to say there, but I really don't think anything would change. I think we would just, the building may look nice, but they may pull all the quality teachers out. Or there may be computers, but nobody's there to manage the system, kind of thing. Or, I think that it'll just be smoke and mirrors. It'll be like, oh yeah, here you go. It's nice and it's new, but there's nobody here to support it. And so it takes you can't complain because you have the computers or you have the building. So now what's the problem? But then nobody will talk about, well, you don't have the support staff to help out, help utilize all of those things to help progress the curriculum and the school as a whole. So I think that it would just be a parade more than it would be an actual celebration of equality when it comes to education.
Good point. Shanice?
I think it would help just to have the equal funding for each school. But like the other panelists have said, I agree with them as far as there might be another loophole in it. It's kind of like the whole thing. You had Obama as a Black president. Now everything is okay, even though we know it's not. So it's like a kind of, and I agree. And it's a lot of assumption. It could be a front. Because we have gone through periods of time where it seemed like, oh yeah, we're finally gonna make it up, or we're finally gonna get this, and then we find out it's not. So I agree with the other panelists. Yes, it would help on the front line, like the picture is gonna look nice, but what's actually going on with it, we won't know. So it's hard to trust the system. That's done wrong for all the time, for as long as it has. So yes, it will help, but at the same time, it will probably take us a while to actually trust the system.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate. I'm sorry, go ahead, Greg.
I would just like to announce that you are all Michael Jackson in The Wiz. You're standing there telling me you can't win. You can't get out of the game. Talking things we're all even as one together.
Hey, shout out to Reese.
Yeah.
Shout out to Reese. He knows why.
But yeah,
oh, man.
You have all depressed me very much. I was not.
We can still have hope, Greg. We can hope.
I did not think about the system around the funds, and now I'm depressed.
And that's the unfortunate thing,
Thanks for ruining my light.
And that's the unfortunate thing where even I don't think Black folks will ever get to a point where we can fully trust America and the intentions of America.
Agreed.
it's I don't know. Like I think it was definitely after the murder of George Floyd, and where there was a lot of protests going on, and there's definitely some phone calls that I received from various white folks in my life, and
Yeah.
and it was kind of interesting to kind of just hear them speaking on it, and it's like, and they're like, oh my gosh, we can't believe this happened, and I'm like, I'm 36 years old, and I've been seeing this and hearing this for 36 years. Where have you been?
Every day,
this
B.
this
Every day.
this isn't new, and then just to see people out in the street protesting in large numbers. Everybody's like, oh, okay, this is it. This is going to be that time. America's finally waking up, and I'm just sitting back like, what America y'all talk about? America doesn't care about us, and I don't think that there is any way for America to care about us. I don't know if it's even worth our energy to keep trying to force America to care about us. I think it's something that's ingrained in the fibers of this country, and large parts of the world, to really dislike darker skinned people for whatever reason that is. I don't know if it's the fear of an equal playing field, like you all said. When that happens, we usually dominate, or what the case is. But I just never believe that America has any good intentions for Black Americans. I think even the election of Obama in some way was some backhanded way for America to slight Black people. Because I mean, looking at post his presidency, you see what situation we're in right now.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where you could end up with somebody like that in office, and I think that it's just kind of like, all right, we gave y'all what you wanted. Now watch this, and then it just and it's unfortunate. I don't know. I just don't trust America, and it's sad.
That's literally another topic.
But like you were saying with speaking about the George Floyd thing, when I always knew that they didn't care about us, but when not even the George Floyd, it was the COVID thing. That's what made me really realize that they really, really don't care at all about us, is when all these years we've been talking about reparations and everything else, and they're just like, we just simply don't have the money to do this, that, and the third. And as soon as it went down, out of thin air, they gave a bunch of wealthy business owners $3 trillion.
Yeah.
Off.
Yeah, this was before the little COVID relief act or whatever it was called. This was just a side piece. They were like, hey, investment banks.
Yeah, just made it rain.
Yeah.
They didn't even make it hell for us. They didn't throw nickels or dimes or nothing, but they made it rain all over the corporations. And once I saw that, I was like,
But see,
so
that's not even
have money to blow on frivolous things for people that already have a bunch of money that don't really need the money, but they're gonna give them the money anyway. So, I mean,
and it's not even the first time that it happened. Like, I think it was unfortunately, it was during the Obama administration when the whole bank bailout happened. I think it was like 1.2 trillion or something like that the banks got, or 1.3 or 4, it was something like that. But if they would have spent 1.1 trillion, they could have eased or wiped completely out the student loan debt that is crippling a majority of Americans right now, which would have bolstered the economy way more than bailing out the banks. Because if you provide millions of people the position to buy a car, to buy a house, to invest into the market and all that stuff, because they're not crippled with 6 figures of student loan debt that just seems to never go down, even though it's APR, it seems to be amateurized. But I digress from that. I think that is it's just who America is. America just isn't. It's the best country money can buy. If you got the money, it's fantastic for you. If you don't, hey,
Yeah, and as long as you get it their way too, you can't get it your own way. You gotta play the game and win it. You gotta play their game.
Hey, let me go ahead and go to the website crazy quotes being dropped today. Guy on the couch, what you got, man?
All right, question number 3. If money was equally distributed to every school, no matter where the students lived, would that help or hurt the education system? Free Black Girl says that may help and would certainly make people feel like the system was more equitable. I still believe that if the fundamentals within our community are not addressed and improved, no amount of funding will help our children succeed in the public school system. Communities with higher parent involvement tend to outperform those with lower parental involvement. Back to you.
This is stuff that we have already addressed on the panel, but does anyone have anything to say to Free Black Girl's comments?
No, I agree with her.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So I'm going to have my little spiel here, and then I'll go into the final plug. So one of the things that I like everyone else, I was jittery on this subject, so I did some research. But one of the things that had popped in my head was something that I had come across like a while ago. There's this lady who does, she does school reporting, I think, for the New York Times. And like this is her only beat is the school board beat, right? And she had done, well, I guess other people had done the study, but she had basically done research to say stuff about, she had done a study basically where they had talked about busing and all that stuff. This is, matter of fact, this happened around the time when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris got into the Democratic, during the Democratic debates. And they were talking about how busing actually didn't work and stuff like that. And she was like, well, the achievement gap from education actually worked very well when they actually were shoving people together into integration. The problem became that, in 2 words, white flight, right? White flight was pretty much the problem. And it always withdrew money from these systems because as long as their kids were in the schools, they were pushing the resources and they were pushing for people to do better and do this and do that. Going back to what Shanice had said before with the Nice White Parents podcast that came out from Serial. It's a good listen if you ever get a chance to. But it's funny to say that because I was of the mindset personally where I was like, I had to take a step back because I looked at my father, I looked at Maurice's father, Shanice's father, Coney's father, and these guys and their mothers too. I don't mean to just keep it to the fellas, but these people, they went to segregated schools, you know, and they all turned out to be fantastic and brilliant and smart. We all got people in our families that went to segregated schools and they turned out fantastic. And we're like, maybe the schools were better when, even though we didn't have anything, when everybody was there who cared, right? Who actually spent time with us. And it was a fascinating thing to listen to when she was talking, because what I realized after she was finished talking was, oh, the problem wasn't so much that they tried to integrate that they wanted to integrate the schools. It's that they never really did. It's that they never succeeded in doing it because people didn't want it to succeed. And that, I think, in a nutshell, is how you get to stuff where you have a whole bunch of different systems to try to educate kids, when if the focus was just on the kids, you'd be able to do it. So I'm going to plug the website one last time, which is www.blackadvancement.com. Donations, we are a nonprofit after all. I mean, come on, guys, give a little. Anyway, so another part that we have is the Black People You Should Know. Black People You Should Know this time that we're going to highlight is John Lewis. We had to update it. He was actually the first person that we put down for our Black People You Should Know. And they had to update it recently because he had passed away. Shout out to him. We salute him. 1940 to 2020. Famed civil rights leader. You should all know who he is. Last but not least is Solutions. We are not an organization that just believes about talking about stuff. We believe in being about something. The solution I want to highlight is another one that we have in the works, which is the Black History online workbook, where we're going to try to make it to where we are doing it for different grade levels. Everybody knows that people get busy during the week, and sometimes you don't get a chance to get that knowledge of self type of learning to your kids as you're going through. Everyone's involved in a rat race, and everybody's doing this and doing that, and they're getting a lot of schooling from school. You give them nuggets here and there, but let's face it, everybody's doesn't have the time that they're supposed to. So something to combat that in terms of them understanding and knowing their own history is us trying to come up with some topics and do it from an Afrocentric perspective. And it's not feel-good history, it's real history, but it's history that, again, helps explain why things are the way they are, and they are that way from a Black perspective. With all that being said, man, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Thank you for watching. You know, you can follow us on Facebook at The Black Advancement, on Twitter at BA Inc. 44, that's capital BAINC 44, or at IG at BA_INC_44. Or you can always go to the website like we had before. Until the next time, peace in advance. Shout out to Hampton University. Does anyone else have any shout outs? Y'all some suckers, man. Post game, we'll talk about it. I'm going to stop recording.